So, and we'll talk about like because Kid Cudi was one guy who did testify.
Huge witness.
Yeah. So, and we'll get there. That was, I think, like a couple weeks into the trial. But maybe at the start, there were 5 final counts on the final indictment that came down. And I believe, if I remember correctly, they along the way, they threw out 3 counts. They threw out like kidnapping. Am I remembering this correctly?
So let me clarify. If I can, let me set the charges. I think it's really important.
That's why you're here, Jesse.
Here we go. There were 5 charges that he went to trial with. Now, when he originally was indicted, I think there were only 3. They upped it to 5. But what you're dealing with is this. Racketeering conspiracy, which I'll explain in a minute. 2 counts of trafficking. Mm-hmm. So one was with respect to Cassie Ventura Fine. The other was with respect to Jane, who was an unidentified victim. And then 2 counts, and these are the ones he was convicted of, transportation to engage in prostitution. We call it the Mann Act violations. I've said from the beginning of this case, those are the easiest charges to convict him of. And I think within a few days of the trial, I was convinced he was going to be convicted.
Yes.
Okay, because literally all they had to prove was, did he transport men? They didn't even have to prove it was sex workers, men across state lines and Jane and Cassie for the purposes of sex work. That's it. And when you look at the travel receipts, you look at the messages from Sean Combs himself, the testimony of his assistants, even voice notes from Sean Combs, it was so clear that he was involved in all of this. He was involved in transporting them, getting them paid, all of it. Very simple. Everybody knew he was going to get convicted.
They had voice notes in Discovery that was played for the jury?
Oh, yeah. Like where he was basically directing about how to get paid.
Come across that.
It was a clear-cut case. I don't know for sure, but I imagine the jury probably decided that very early on. Now, put those to the side. The complicated charges were the ones he was ultimately acquitted of. Okay, let's start with racketeering conspiracy, because one of the big questions that we got throughout the trial for 8 weeks was, what is RICO? Like, what are we talking about? Traditionally, when we talk about racketeering or RICO or RICO conspiracy, is the mob, okay? So it's simple. There's a mob boss. You have the officers. They're all trying to benefit the family. They're doing all this criminal activity to benefit the family. Drug trafficking, murder.
Oh, we don't do drugs.
Okay, yeah. Well,
No
you keep
drugs.
it in a certain area. You keep it in a certain area. I don't want it near schools.
I don't want it sold to children.
Yeah.
That's an infamy.
It's good.
I'm not going to go to the other line because that's kind of racist. But
yeah.
we'll cut it.
Money laundering, gambling, all of that. All of these underlying crimes to benefit the family, to benefit a criminal enterprise. That's essentially what it's been used for in the past. This was a little different. You're not charging all the members of the mafia. You're charging one person, Sean Combs, with racketeering conspiracy. The theory is that he operated a criminal enterprise for years, that he used his assistants, his bodyguards, his staff to engage in a pattern of abusing women, manipulating women, exploiting women to benefit himself. And if he benefits, if he's getting his sexual desires fulfilled, it benefits everybody else. The businesses are doing well, he's doing it. So all of these assistants, all of his underlings were basically engaging in a pattern of crimes and covering them up. Now, in order to prove racketeering conspiracy, there are 2 parts. One, as I said, you have to establish there was a criminal enterprise. You have to establish conspiracy. That means that there was an agreement, that he and at least one other co-conspirator agreed to do this together, agreed to engage in a pattern of illegal activity. If you move past, if the jury accepts that there was a criminal enterprise and there was a criminal agreement, then you move on to the second half. And I believe that first half was the problem. I don't think the jury ever accepted that he was the leader of this criminal enterprise. What I do think that they figured out, and this was easy, once you establish there's a criminal enterprise, there's a criminal agreement, the second part is the prosecution has to prove at least 2 underlying crimes: kidnapping, arson, sex trafficking, drug distribution, obstruction, okay? Arson. They only had to prove 2. The reason you thought that they dropped some charges is a misnomer. It was a
misnomer.
It was misinformation, and it's not your fault. It was bad reporting on it. On the eve of going into, I think it was closing arguments, at least going into closing arguments, there was reporting, prosecution's dropping kidnapping and arson. Oh my gosh, their case is weak. That wasn't what happened. For each of those underlying crimes, there were different theories. the jury could say, I think Sean Combs engaged in kidnapping. I think that's one of the underlying crimes. No. Or I think he engaged in aiding and abetting kidnapping or attempted kidnapping. There were all of these underlying theories for each one of those crimes. So if they said, I think he engaged in conspiracy to commit kidnapping, but I don't think he actually committed kidnapping himself. Or I think he committed kidnapping, but I don't really think he engaged in aiding and abetting kidnapping. It's very complicated. So what did the prosecution do? They just removed a couple of the theories for kidnapping and arson. They removed, I think it was attempted kidnapping and arson, but they didn't remove kidnapping and arson. They said, no, he committed these crimes, or he engaged in conspiracy to commit kidnapping and arson, or aiding and abetting kidnapping and arson. So there was misnomers. A lot of people thought that those kidnapping and arson were removed from the racketeering count. It wasn't the case. So the jury had a big task. I think they spent a lot of time on this. A, did he engage in a criminal enterprise, a criminal agreement, and were there at least two underlying crimes that the prosecution proved? 90% of the case was about racketeering conspiracy. Sex trafficking. What's sex trafficking? It's not like Taken. It's not always like Taken,
right,
where you have a shadowy organization that kidnaps young girls, ships them out. That is an easily digestible and explainable sex trafficking concept. Here, what they were saying is it was sex trafficking of his girlfriends, that he used force, fraud, or coercion to transport them across state lines for the purposes of commercial sex work, that he was forcing them.
Commercial sex work.
Right, meaning that they were, meaning that he was forcing them to engage in sex acts with prostitutes or male performers by using force, fraud, or coercion. Force is easy to understand. He was using physical violence or threats of physical violence. Or he was maintaining control over them, maintaining control over their careers, their finances, that pressure, that power dynamic. Maybe he was using fraud. He was lying about the relationship. He was lying about certain things to get what he wanted. Now, I will tell you, there were certain aspects of this case where I think the prosecution checked off a number of those boxes. But clearly, they didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. There's a difference between checking them out. I get how they're doing it, and I can list out some of them where I think, for each one of them, I actually thought that I thought it was 50-50 if he was going to get convicted of racketeering conspiracy for what I said. But I did believe that there was a strong chance he was going to get convicted of sex trafficking of Cassie. There were 3 incidents, in my opinion, that were demonstrated that.
Was one of them the infamous video that shows him just beating the shit out of her?
Why? That's how the prosecution started their case.
Yes, they literally played the video on the opening argument.
That's what they got to do. That's what they have to do. Opening statement. Why did they show it? It wasn't just him beating her. He's not charged with domestic violence. He's not charged with assault. She claims that this happened at the LA Intercontinental Hotel. Okay, so first of all, sex trafficking. It's one of the many locations that she was transported to have sex with male prostitutes. Okay, so you travel element, done. She claims she was leaving a freak off. Okay, a freak off is this, experience with a male prostitute. So now you have the commercial sex element. He goes on that tape, he beats her, and he drags her back in the direction of the room.
That's right.
That checked off for me all of the elements of sex trafficking. Okay? Jury didn't believe it. Another one, and this one I don't think was talked about nearly enough. Okay? She claims that she was on a plane with Sean Combs, okay? And they're coming back, I think, from Cannes. He sits next to her. He shows her a video that he recorded of her engaging in sex acts, threatened to release them. So now you have a travel component, you have a threat component. They land, he demands a freak off, he gets a freak off. Travel, threat, right, coercion, and commercial sex act. That's another check right there. And by the way, I have to tell you, before the jury came back with their verdict, and by the way, there was another, Daniel Phillip, who was one of the male performers, he testified that he observed Sean Combs, at least heard him slapping her, dragging her.
Wasn't he like the first witness too?
One of the first witnesses.
Like they had like the security guard and him that day one.
Right.
Almost.
So those 3 episodes, before they even went into deliberations, I said to myself and I said to the viewers, there's a strong chance he'll be convicted of sex trafficking because the prosecution was key. They said, you only need to find 1 episode of sex trafficking. That's it. Yes, he had a lot of sexual encounters with Cassie Ventura, fine. Not saying all of them were sex trafficking. We're not saying that. A lot of it was consensual. You just need to find one episode. There were, at least for me, 3 that they could have found. Right before the jury came back with their verdict, and let's talk about what happened. Right before they came back with their verdict, they said, can we get a readback of the testimony of those 3 episodes? And then a few hours later, they come back with that. Remember what happened? They said, we have come to a verdict on sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution. We're hung right now on racketeering conspiracy. I went on air and I said, I know they've convicted him of transportation to engage in prostitution. I believe that they've convicted him of Cassie. Why would they ask for a readback of all those 3 specific episodes and then come back with a verdict?
Of Cassie sex trafficking.
Yeah, I'm like, clearly. Yeah. Now, they didn't ask for a readback of Jane, which to me, I was like, he was found not guilty of her. Because Jane was, I think, the more problematic witness.
Did Jane testify too?
She testified. She testified, but she was a problematic witness for them. I don't mean she wasn't telling the truth. Let's be clear. I'm not even saying Cassie wasn't telling the truth. I think that what the problem is what they recounted just didn't fit into the elements of sex trafficking because of all of the text messages that came out where they were encouraging these sexual episodes. They were setting them up. They were staying in contact with him. They were talking about how much they love Sean Combs. That's the power dynamic between an alleged victim and an abuser is very complicated, but it was probably hard for the jury to say beyond a reasonable doubt, were they really sex trafficked? That becomes a question.
It gets uncomfortable to even talk about, for example, and just one of many examples you can talk about here, when you have someone like Cassie who was in a long-term relationship with him, obviously it was abusive. We have that on video.
Yeah.
But she did stay in it. Now, was she coerced to stay in it? Certainly can make the argument there. And did appear to, I mean, if you look at some of the text messages and her setting stuff up, there were aspects of the relationship besides the actual abuse where she enjoyed it. So when you have someone like that then also claiming, oh, he raped me, it gets weird when you're in a relationship too. It's like, all right, well, you're not married, but how – it's not that that's impossible. That does happen, but I'm just thinking as like a juror or something, when you're hearing that, you got to be so confused with what the semantics are.
The counter argument to that is someone can agree 9 times out of 10, the one time that they don't could be a crime.
Of
right?
course.
Now, I think Mark Agnifilo, who is one of Sean Combs' many defense attorneys, made a great argument in closing argument. I actually bolded it. I made it in bold, said it on air. I said, this is key. He goes, I'm paraphrasing, but basically he said, let me get this straight. So 75 of his sexual encounters are good. And then episode 76, that's sex trafficking. What a leap that is.
Whoa.
And I said, that's a great argument. That's a great argument. Like he goes, use your common sense. And they admitted it. First day, they go, he engaged in domestic violence.
Yes.
They
admitted that before the trial.
But we're owning up to it. He engaged in domestic violence. If he went to trial, he'd plead guilty because on state charges. There's no defense for what he did. But it's not racketeering. It's not sex trafficking. It just doesn't fit the elements. And clearly they won.
Why were this is another very basic legal question, but for people out there who aren't legal experts, why if the statute of limitations had passed on the domestic violence charge and therefore he was not charged with that, why was that admissible in court? Couldn't that sway a jury, like, I guess, with your constitutional rights, if that makes sense?
Okay, here's a great question. A couple of things. The question was, how do you hold Sean Combs accountable? Statute of limitations on state charges, like the 2016 episode, they couldn't charge him with assault or battery. I don't know what it is in California for that. They couldn't charge him. So how do you transform it into a federal trial? How do you transform it into a federal case? Well, there are certain federal domestic violence charges out there. They don't apply to the facts of the case. I looked them up. They don't apply. Now, racketeering is interesting. Why is racketeering a favorite of prosecutors? Because you can include so much.
Right.
You can include so much evidence.
That's why we hate it in Jersey.
Yeah. So much old evidence. So much to build up that case. You can include elements of things that you can no longer charge him with at a state level as evidence of sex trafficking as well. And that was the advantage. But the disadvantage is, does it amount to those charges? Does it check off the elements? and they're free to use it. The defense would always try to get it blocked out. They would say it's too prejudicial, but they didn't succeed. And obviously they were going in with that was a really bad video. It changed the whole game. But the prosecution was free to use it as evidence of him engaging in a long pattern of abusing women, using his resources to cover up his abuse of Cassie, buying the videotape, evidence of him using force to get her to engage in a commercial sex act. That's how they framed it. That's how they styled the narrative. But they were freely allowed to use it.
Yeah. Now, this next point is, I'll even call it out before I ask it. It's actually like almost hypocritical for me to ask this, and I'll explain why. But the marketing from the prosecution.
Yeah.
The reason I say this is hypocritical is because I've talked about this a lot in the past with like when Preet Bharara was in charge of the Southern District in New York, and particularly my friend Rajaratnam's case. He had a PR team of like 6 people or some shit who were like planting everything in the media at all times. Everyone was like a movie star who was trying this big bad hedge fund guy, and he was convicted in the media before he was convicted in court. And I've argued that something like that shouldn't be allowed. You should not be able to, as a government, have a PR team. He literally had a PR team to go out and like litigate the facts of the case in public to sway public opinion and sway potential juries and sway the overall vibe of the case. That said, they do that, and it felt like of all the cases where you would ever do that, if you're allowed to do that as the government, when you're trying one of the biggest music moguls of the 21st century, I feel like I would know every prosecutor's name. They'd be on the front of every single newspaper. Well, now online, they'd be on the front of every TV report. They'd be out there on the pulpit every day after trial screaming this, and that. And I'm not saying they didn't do any of that, but it didn't seem like they did a lot of that. It felt like they were very quiet. Why did they make that decision?
They were very serious about this prosecution. And particularly after, by the way, it was an all-female prosecution team, which I think is important in basically a sexual violence case. I think that was important there, logistics there, but also optics there, I should say. But also I think it was very serious. We're not going to try this case in the media. We don't want to give Sean Combs anything that he can use in an appeal. Oh, the prosecutors went out, they tainted the jury pool, because they were very confident in their case. They thought that they were going to convict him. And the last thing that they want is to give him any ammunition to challenge that conviction. I don't blame them. They shouldn't. Now, I think there was one other thing that happened too. At the very start of this case, when Sean Combs was arrested and indicted, the then United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams, who's no longer there, he held a press conference. He held a press conference.
Yes.
Now, it's not unusual. I've seen attorneys, I've seen prosecutors hold press conferences when there is a big charge. They did it with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein.
All the time, yeah.
I don't blame them for doing it. It's a case, a very important case. They thank the investigators that are a part of it. It's a matter of public interest. They explain the indictment, but they didn't, even if you look at the press conference, he wouldn't go into more details about the evidence. He would basically say, just refer to what's in the indictment, refer what's into the indictment. Having said that, I recall that the defense, at least in one filing, had made a mention of what Damian Williams did. And they said it wasn't right what he did. It prejudiced a potential jury. I don't think the prosecutors moving forward said, we don't want to do anything like that. We don't want to give Sean Combs anything that he can use to appeal his conviction successfully.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. It's just like, man, the public sway was already so strong against him, and he's a powerful guy, and he's a connected guy. So again, not that you should look at it this way. You have to look at court objectively, but you would think there would be some wiggle room with something like that, meaning no judge, because they are all human beings, wants to be the dude that on like a small detail that's very subjective decides to throw out the case against Diddy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, this judge was awesome, by the way. He was down the book. He was really fair, smart guy. You know who became stars now? Diddy's defense team. They held a press conference after the verdict because it's a win for them. He got acquitted of the most serious charges. But the attorneys that we read about each and every day, when they came out there, they were getting applause. I mean, one of them was Brian Steele. He was
Young Thug's.
Young Thug's attorney.
Yeah.
He's a superstar. Mark Agnifilo is now a superstar.
Yep.
Nicole Westmoreland, who's really tiny, she's a superstar. You look at Tenny Garagos, who's Mark Garagos' daughter. She's now a superstar. This was they call it the dream team. He hired an incredible defense team who put on exceptional cross-examination. They didn't even have to put on a case. They didn't call one witness. And I have to
They didn't call one witness?
They didn't call one witness. All they did was introduce a few more text messages and called it a day because they figured they raised enough reasonable doubt in cross-examination, which they did.
Well, you were one of the guys. I talked to a few different people before this case was going on who was like, yo, don't be surprised if this isn't a home run for the government. Like we have to find, you were saying you have to find out what the final indictment's going to look like, number one. Number two, as much as, the public, we in the public want to convict the guy for being a scumbag, it is technically not a crime to be a scumbag. You have to be a scumbag that officially, provably, demonstrably broke the law or the laws that you're accused of breaking. And that's effectively what we saw here.
One thing I'll mention, and I forgot who told this to me, but it stuck with me. You have victims in this case.
Of course.
Even if he was acquitted across the board, they're still victims. They're victims of either what would have been state charges or they're victims at the very general sense of a toxic, abusive relationship.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that he should be convicted of racketeering or sex trafficking.
Yes. Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you. And here's the other thing that it's the 500-pound elephant in the room, and I got to bring this up because I keep seeing this movie play out over and over again, and it's not to be just like conspiratorial about all of it.
Yeah.
But Ghislaine Maxwell found guilty on Wednesday, December 29th, 2021. In fact, it was during COVID and the jurors for the holiday wanted to go home and take a break, and the judge said, fuck you, you're staying in here, get this done. So she's found guilty during one of the deadest media weeks of the year, where New Year's Eve falls on a Friday, New Year's Day is a Saturday. By Monday, that news is old. In fact, Ghislaine Maxwell didn't traffic people to anybody? Who even heard that? Then you go back to when Epstein offed himself. Huge air quotes right there. It was a Saturday morning early in August, the deadest news month of the year. Everyone's on fucking vacation. It's over by Monday morning when the news cycle starts again. That's already dead to begin with. Jean-Luc Brunel, who was his trafficker, Epstein's trafficker in Europe, in France, and around the world. He kills himself on Saturday morning of President's Day weekend. Early on Saturday morning of President's Day weekend in America, news cycle's dead by Tuesday. Nobody's talking about it. Sean Diddy Combs goes through this whole month-long trial, which had plenty of coverage from guys like you. Yeah, 2 months, exactly. Plenty of coverage from guys like you. Independent media covered it. Mainstream media seemed to cover it a lot less than I thought they were going to, which is interesting. He is found guilty during a year when July 4th falls on a Friday. Many public companies literally gave their employees off for the week. He's found guilty on Wednesday the 2nd, very similar to Ghislaine Maxwell here. It is Friday. It's already old news. Monday, people are groggily getting back to work, and people are like, oh, yeah, something happened with Diddy. So point being, it seems to me that there's a little bit of a pattern here where very powerful people get put on trial, and the timing of when these trials wrap up, regardless of what their actual outcome is quite pristine.
Well, I can't talk about the consistency in when they're happening, but what I can tell you is don't let anyone tell you that a holiday doesn't affect jury deliberations. Now, here's what happened. We were all betting when the jury was going to come back. I thought it was going to, if this started on Monday and there was a full week and there was no holiday, I actually thought the jury was going to take the full week. I didn't think that they would come back with a verdict till Friday. We even put up a poll on Law and Crime on our YouTube show, and it was majority of people said it's going to take 2+ days. Now, one of the things the jury didn't know was that if they didn't come back with a verdict on Wednesday, typically court would be closed July 3rd on that Thursday. It's a court holiday. However, the judge was going to allow them to deliberate. The judge said, should I tell them this? And the defense says, don't tell them this yet. Because if you tell them this, they might feel the need to be like, come back with a decision immediately. They don't want to put the court out. So they were going to be given the option to deliberate on Thursday. They came back before the holiday weekend. You have to imagine they sat through an 8-week trial, 7-week trial, saw sex tapes, violence, the most disgusting stuff. I mean, no one's denying what Diddy liked. I mean, I'm not even going to repeat half the stuff that he liked. They sat through all that. You don't think they want to go home? Of course they want to go home.
Judge, we got to beat the short traffic. Come on.
Yeah.
This shit's getting old.
But they took their job seriously. There's no as somebody who covered this trial and somebody who was reporting on this, and we had a reporter embedded in the courtroom observing the jury every day. This was a jury that took the responsibility very seriously, that listened to all the evidence. They were not slacking off. They didn't fall asleep. They weren't checked out. They were paying attention to everything. They deliberated. And you have to say that some will say it's a wrong verdict. Some will say it's a great verdict. The fact that they found him guilty of the charges that it seemed like he probably was going to get convicted of, and the ones that they acquitted of, this is a jury that carefully considered the evidence. And I can't say that the holiday weekend rushed them to that. I don't believe that. But it is interesting. It is interesting. They came back on Tuesday night, said we have verdicts on 4 of the 5 charges, but we can't come to a decision on racketeering conspiracy. I don't remember if the word was we're immovable on our positions. I don't remember what the word was. Judge said, go back, deliberate.
I got golf in the Hamptons on Thursday, pal. Let's go.
They went, they're like, we're going to go home for the night. Came back the next morning, and within an hour, they had a decision. Now, could it be they went back home? They said they sat on it. We don't know what the holdouts were, if there was 1 holdout, 2 holdouts. It's interesting. The majority of the cases that I cover, when there's a hung jury, meaning they can't come to a decision, it's either A, they stick with that. They say, we're deadlocked. We can't come to a decision, or we're not going to change our opinions. Or sometimes it's not guilty. Sometimes it is guilty. I mean, it's hard to say. I thought that they were going to be hung. I thought they were like, if we can't come to a decision on this, nothing's going to change our perspective. And by the way, when there's a jury that's hung, that means some jurors are ready to convict him of racketeering conspiracy. That's right. Which made me know that he was already getting convicted of other charges. Yes. You're not going to have jurors who are ready to convict him on racketeering conspiracy and acquitted him from everything else. Not the case.
And you were calling, like you said, you were calling the shots on this publicly. I saw it.
The end. It was just. I knew that he was going to be found not guilty with respect to Jane. I knew he was going to be found guilty with respect to transportation, engaged in prostitution. The other ones were sex trafficking of Cassie and racketeering. It was a toss-up.
Yeah. Now the judge. This starts on May 5th. The judge estimated that the trial was going to be 8 weeks, and he seems to have been correct literally down to the day, which means they knew when the jury was going for deliberations.
It was about 7 weeks because they were anticipating the defense might put on a defense. And by the way, if Sean Combs took the stand, this trial was going to take a lot longer.
Oh, he had been on there for 3 weeks talking about himself.
There was going to be more witnesses that were supposed to testify. There was at least 2 other alleged victims that were supposed to testify. One couldn't be found. It was very bizarre. One
couldn't be found.
Oh, you don't know about this? Alleged victim number 3, I think it was Gina in this case. This is Sean Combs' other love interest who was a source of jealousy for Cassie and all this. She wasn't responding apparently, and her attorney wasn't responding to a subpoena.
They send her a tweet, something?
They just couldn't find her. And at one point during the trial, the defense goes, she's not a part of this case. She was not a part of this case.
Yeah.
She goes, she's not a part of this case. And the prosecution's like, no, she's very much a part of this case. And she was never called as a witness. A lot of people were like, oh, what happened to her? She was not a part of the case. We don't know what happened, but maybe she wouldn't have been a cooperative witness. And the defense was planning on calling their own witnesses. They were going to call the head of HR of Sean Combs' enterprise. They were going to call their own psychological expert, their own forensic psychologist, to rebut the testimony of the prosecution's own psychological expert who talked about the power dynamics between a victim and an abuser. They didn't call anybody. And they think at the end of the day, they're like, we don't have to. We thoroughly They cross-examined one of the, when I say alleged victim in this case, she wasn't necessarily a part of the indictment, but her testimony helped support that of Cassie and Jane. And also I think it was part of the underlying racketeering case. It was like, if he's abusing women as part of this criminal enterprise, I think she helped. There was a woman, okay, Brianna Bongolan, who testified Sean Combs held her off a 17-story balcony, okay? Really important testimony. The defense dismantled her testimony.
How'd they do that?
Oh, number one, there was a message where she offered to buy Sean Combs a T-shirt like a week after this happened. Strange. They looked at the travel records and the timestamp, the metadata so first of all, the metadata of when she took photos of her alleged injuries, it looked like those photos weren't taken when she said the injuries happened.
How do we know that?
They looked at the metadata and they said it's not adding up. Then, listen to this. She said this attack happened at a certain time and place. They looked at the travel records and Sean Combs' hotel receipts. He was on the other side of the country. I mean, and here's the problem. You might say the prosecution's going to throw as much as they possibly can at Sean Combs. Great, right? Great. So much they can throw.
Yeah.
The more you put in, it's more for the defense to dissect. If they dissect the testimony of a Brianna Bongolan, or they dissect the testimony of another alleged victim, Mia, who claims that when she was working for Sean Combs, he sexually assaulted her multiple times, yet they say, we'll show you text messages where she's staying in touch with him. She wished him a happy birthday on social media. The more that they raise reasonable doubt with respect to those alleged victims, arguably it weakens the rest of the case.
Some of that gets hard, though, because on the one hand, you have, what is it, Helsinki syndrome or whatever, where someone's,
Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome.
Close.
Where people, it sets in, where people feel like a need to appease their abuser or the person who's holding them hostage, so to speak. Obviously, I'm paralleling that term right there from what it officially is. And then on the other hand, you have like what I might call the Me Too effect or something like that. And let's use the example of Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein was obviously a scumbag. He obviously, in my book, when you look at the cases, clearly abused many, many women. When that case came out, though, you saw a lot of initial accusers come out with very compelling stories where you're like, whoa, and then a lot of it checked out in court. Obviously, there's something going on with one of the cases right now. It's a separate issue. I don't want to go down that right now. But a lot of it was obviously proven in court. And then you suddenly had a lot of other people come in. And to me, it really actually hurts real victims too, because for whatever reason, people like to join the party sometimes. And then, you will have liars come in and claim stuff that didn't happen. And so to your point, when the prosecution says, all right, we're going to bring in 1 million fucking witnesses, let's say they bring in 20 or 25 legit witnesses who are going to be claiming abuse. If you just, knock a peg in one of them and say, wait a minute, there's a hole in that story.
Yeah.
Suddenly, if I'm a jury, I go, well, did I miss holes in all the others too?
Here's the counter argument. Ready?
Okay.
Counter argument is everybody's lying about him.
Yeah,
Every single person is lying. And what's their incentive? Cassie already got paid. She got paid a $20 million settlement. Why is she going to go on the stand and commit perjury? Why is she really going to do that? I mean, really. Now, again, I go to the idea of, were these witnesses lying, or are they telling the truth, but it just doesn't match up to what the narrative is the prosecution's selling? Now, there were problems in some of the testimony. It could be, yeah, they're not telling the truth. They're going after Sean Combs. Or it could be traumatic moment, memory issues. It could be, I think Mia had said when she was asked about some of the inconsistencies of her behavior, she says, go ask my therapist, go ask my psychologist. Like, that's fair. That's a fair argument to make. I mean, it is complicated why people stay in touch and feel this kind of emotional connection and love for Sean Combs or an alleged abuser. Sometimes it looks a little strange. Like with Jane, yes. Look, Jane, you couple the idea of she had messages where she was trying to set up these Wild King nights. She was expressing her love for Sean Combs. There were messages where she clearly expressed her reluctance to engaging in any of this, particularly after Cassie filed her lawsuit. She came out, text messages to Combs where she's like, I feel like a victim. I feel like the same way. Like this woke everything up to me. Okay. But she's still getting her rent paid by Sean Combs. That's
not great.
She was with him right before he got arrested.
Oh, in 2024?
Yeah. Like 2024, like 2024. right before. That's what complicates the conversation. Now, here's the truth. Here's the truth, Julian. He was acquitted, and look, he's innocent. He was innocent until proven guilty. He has a right to put on a defense. The prosecution did not meet their burden. Here's the truth. He's facing 66 lawsuits right now. Alleged accusers, they may feel that after this criminal jury didn't believe it, they're not going to move forward with their lawsuits. They may say, if Cassie wasn't believed and Jane wasn't believed, am I going to go on the stand?
Wait a minute, though. Yeah. This is different, though, because you're talking about civil court. In
Yeah.
criminal court, the burden is on the government to
Sure.
prove 100%. In civil court, all they
50-50.
got to do
Yeah.
is like get
Yeah, yeah,
51%.
That's true. I by the way, with his cases, and by the way, it hasn't stopped. I mean, even after the verdict, like even towards the end of the trial, he's already been hit with more lawsuits. But here's what's interesting, what I think he's going to do with it. Because now he has to tackle these, aside from what he'll be sentenced to, and we can talk about that. But basically, with his civil cases, one, I think he's going to a lot of them have filed lawsuits against him when they're Jane Does or John Does, so they're not being identified. Civil court, you don't have much room to do that. You have to really show that it's a danger for you to proceed. And so I think what's going to happen is he's going to first try every single which way to expose the identities of these accusers who are filing lawsuits against them. And if he can get the court to agree that these people can't proceed under a pseudonym, they may drop the case. They may be like, I don't want to be exposed. I don't want to continue anymore. That's one. Number two, he's going to probably file motions to dismiss half of them if he hasn't already. He's going to have to take each case piece by piece, but you also have to imagine, unless he agrees to some sort of global settlement, which I don't think he will do, he's going to try to fight each one of these, and you wonder whether any of them will go to court, and we're going to see something like this, maybe in a jurisdiction where there are cameras, although right now I don't believe that there are. I think they're mostly in New York.
It's still like, to your point, it does look like he just beat the system. And he's this powerful dude, and he was so guilty in the court of public opinion, and then he won. And this is a guy who loves to intimidate people. He's done it his entire life. And it, like... By the way, let's go back to that. The third witness they couldn't find. That is so sketchy.
So weird, right?
Like,
particularly in this case.
Do we know that she's alive?
I have no reason to suspect that she's in physical danger or she's
It's a very
harmed.
good lawyerly way of putting
I have
that.
no reason to suspect that. And let me tell you, during our live shows, that was like the number one question. Did something happen to her? No reason to suspect that. I wonder if she's like, listen, I'm not going to cooperate. You can call me in, but I'm not going to be a good witness for you, prosecution.
Well, besides her, then why do you think if Agnifilo, that's how you say it?
We've been saying Agnifilo,
if he and Steele and the team were able to so effectively just tear apart Jane Doe witness 2, why do you think the prosecution called her and used her as such a significant witness? And do you think they just didn't see that coming?
Okay, let me now give the other side of it. First of all, they needed more than Cassie to establish racketeering. There's talking about a pattern of abusive people, a pattern of abusive women. You can't just have Cassie. Jane, let me tell you the benefits of her testimony. So if you ask me, was he going to be convicted of sex trafficking of Jane? I said 20%, 20% he'll get convicted. But there was a percent where he might. Now, why? I mentioned the text messages. Text messages are such powerful evidence. It's very hard to say you didn't send it. I mean, they didn't even debate. There was a real conversation. She was clearly expressing reluctance to engaging in these sexual episodes, whether she felt that she was not being treated right, whether there was a sense of jealousy, whether it was Cassie's lawsuit being filed, and she goes, I feel the same way. It's like my awakening. Those messages are powerful. If you're trying to say she was not consenting to what happened. There was another moment where they talk about, he had financial control over her, was paying her rent, controlling how she would make money, goes to the coercion aspect of sex trafficking. But there was another point. And this is when she said in June of 2024. So if you remember the timeline, this is after the Cassie tape was published by CNN. This is after his properties were raided. She claims that he physically attacked her, that he brought in a male performer and says, take this pill and go out there. You're not going to ruin my night. Now, normally if I said that...
After all that.
After all of this.
After the apology tape where he's rubbing his head, going, that's not me, that's not me. Yeah.
I wasn't in the courtroom, but when I'm told it was compelling testimony, it was powerful testimony.
Wow.
Now, normally I would say if I said that about John Smith, how on earth are you going to prove that John Smith said that? But after everything the jury saw in text messages and videos, is it really outside the realm of possibility that he said and did something like that? So you look at that and you say, I get why they called Jane. I get why. And particularly in 2024, they wanted it as close as time. So he was dating her, I think, 2020 or 2021 to 2024, as close in time to when they arrested him. We're not talking about something from 2005.
Right.
Clearly, they needed to call her. But again, I don't think it was a situation where she wasn't telling the truth. I think it was she was telling her truth. She was telling what happened. But at the same point, it wasn't sex trafficking or it wasn't racketeering, at least according to the jury.
Right.
I'm not a jury member, but it didn't seem to me that even what the defense was suggesting is she was making things up. It was like, it almost felt to me that the defense at times were saying, the prosecution's on trial. Okay? They shouldn't have brought you. They shouldn't have brought you as a witness. You have no reason being here in this sex trafficking racketeering trial. That's the way that I thought.
Did they...
And again, not to take away from their testimony, because I imagine it obviously was incredibly difficult to testify and explain this.
Like, we know the statute of limitations, for example, ran out on the domestic violence tape that happened in 2016 and stuff like that. But what officially were the statute of limitations for, like, the sex trafficking? Because some of the claims that people have made, like even in civil lawsuits, go back to like 1999 and stuff. And you just raised the point that Jane Doe was someone who was more recent. But how far were they allowed to even go back with those claims?
So for racketeering, my understanding is there had to be a certain like 10-year time frame when certain conduct had to have happened. I think I'm right about that. But from the civil context, the reason this all started, the reason Cassie filed her lawsuit, and the reason we've seen a plethora of lawsuits, particularly in New York, is there was a change in New York law where there was a look-back window. It was a 2-year look-back window. There was a specific law that was passed where you had 2 years to file a lawsuit against your abuser, against the person who assaulted you, even no matter how old the claim was, even if it happened like 20 years ago. You have 2 years to say it, because they wanted to give people an opportunity. They said, look, our understanding of sexual assault has changed.
Right.
People will not come forward. They might feel scared. They might not even recognize they're a victim until after they get therapy. So we're going to give people a 2-year look-back window,
like a grandfather clause almost.
To file a lawsuit against your accuser. Now, on one hand, you could say, wow, that's great. Gives them a legal opportunity. Sure, we can't bring criminal charges on that because it's too old. But as you said, civil case, very different. It's great, but then you still have to prove it. So if I'm saying something happened in 2000, it's much difficult to prove that something happened in 2000 versus 2004. So it's catch-22. You might have more people filing lawsuits, but maybe there's a lack of video evidence or text messages or witness availability. So it's not an easy case.
Now, during the whole trial, obviously, you're covering this every day. You're basically doing recap shows of what's happening with analysis, bringing in guests and all that. You had people inside the courtroom.
We had,
obviously, right? So what was the setup? Like, how were you getting information? Like, take me through a normal day as best you could.
So we had a reporter named Elizabeth Milner, who's been part of Law and Crime for several years. She was in that courtroom every single day for every piece of testimony, and she was like an encyclopedia. She would go through notebooks and notebooks of taking notes, and she would come on 2 times during the day. One, she would come on during our lunch show that we did live on YouTube, and the viewers loved her. They called her Queen Elizabeth by the end.
Elizabeth.
They loved her. She was answering all the questions.
We need a new one.
Yeah, well, she was answering all the questions, but then I had her on sidebar, and we did like 30-minute, hour-long sidebar episodes. At the end of the day, we published it at night. They went incredibly viral. I mean, like tons of views on it, because she basically was like an encyclopedia of everything that happened during the day. She gave details about everybody's testimony. And so for people who couldn't follow the trial and read, they were just turned on sidebar and were like, okay, what happened in testimony today? And she did it every day.
What are the mules with that? Because again, I don't have cameras in the courtroom to even know. But like, did she have to write this down physically?
She couldn't type. She had to write it down physically. She couldn't have her cell phone. She had to leave the courtroom to actually send a message. So we would get a message, oh, Elizabeth's out. Then she'd come out, she'd look at her notes. And
so she had to go get the phone
she couldn't
from
even
the
prepare.
security.
She couldn't even prepare. She couldn't be like, oh, I'm ready to go. She had to go out and was like, okay, Elizabeth, what happened with... and she had to really, like in real time, look at her notes. And that's the same thing in state court at times. There was one guy who we all followed, Inner City Press, Matthew Russell Lave.
He's on every case.
He was great. He has special permission to actually live tweet.
That makes so much sense. That dude has everything.
Live tweet the trial, which is what we all followed. He was great. You know why I know he's great? Because at the end of the day, I would match his tweets his ex-post, whatever, his tweets to the transcript,
Yes.
and they were verbatim.
Oh,
I mean,
it's
he was
amazing.
great. So
I
he
follow
was-
him for every case that happens.
He's phenomenal. He's phenomenal.
He
He's
writes
great.
like a book at the end of every case too, where he just takes the transcripts
should.
and like I haven't even read one of them, but apparently it's like he's just taking the transcripts with the quick notes on it. And
You know what's interesting about him?
self-publishes.
I interviewed him on Sidebar, and you would think that he's also apparently a lawyer. So when I asked him questions, I thought I was just going to get like a reporter answer. Well, the prosecutor's like, I think they did a bad job. I was like, whoa, like he's really giving his opinion about it, which I thought was great. He was phenomenal reporter in this case.
So that's amazing though. Queen Elizabeth was running in and out of the courtroom.
In and out. And
And
people were worried about it. Like, are you eating? Are you sleeping enough?
What did she say it was like in there? For like, put me in there if you can. How big was the courtroom? How many people were in there? How much of his family was there every day? I know at one point some of them had to go back to the West Coast for like prom and graduation stuff. But like, what was Diddy like?
Yeah. So she basically said the courtroom was packed. Diddy's family members came like almost every single day. There was a guy that I interviewed, Charlucci, who's his like close friend, who's been there every day. He was wearing
Charlucci.
He was wearing like the Free Puff t-shirts. I actually interviewed him the other day. So he had supporters. The jury, I was told, when they were shown, and to be clear, let's be clear about what happened. They were shown sex tapes. They were shown videos of freak-offs. They would have to wear headphones, watch it on their individual monitors. There were some who Elizabeth told us had to take off the headphones towards the end, like they looked like they had enough of seeing it. And plus they were shown it multiple times.
Like the meme of the guy.
They were just like but they didn't they were very serious about what they were watching. They were very attentive, looking always at the witnesses. Combs was interesting. From our understanding and from the reporting, he was very, very involved in his defense, constantly passing notes, talking to his attorneys. He did get in a little bit of trouble at one point.
Yeah, the judge reprimanded him.
Told him stop nodding at the jury. And I think what happened was it came after a very successful cross-examination. And by the way, cross-examination is when the defense questioned the prosecution's witnesses. A very successful cross-examination day. The defense won that day. And I think he was getting excited and like nodding to the jury, like, you hear this? Yeah. And
you hear this? Your body's going to be 6 feet below if you didn't.
And you just nailed it. So this is the problem. Why is it a big deal? Defendant can never do anything to influence a jury, but a guy who's been accused of manipulating the system and obstructing justice and threatening people to be nodding at the jury is not great. And the judge said, if he does it again, I will give an instruction to this jury you will not like. Okay? Now, it could be really bad. It would be something along the lines of, I noticed Sean Combs, jury members, you might notice Sean Combs is nodding at you. Like, he didn't say this, but he could have been like, you know how Sean Combs has been nodding at you? Disregard any attempt that he is making to influence your decision, right? I mean, he wouldn't do that. It would be extreme, but basically.
But they have to know that inherently without him saying it too, right?
Yeah.
Like, why is this fucking guy who's worth millions of dollars nodding at me?
Feeling good, like he's like, but yeah, he was
ever seen him nod, Jesse?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: we had the AI video. Apparently, when the verdict came down, he collapsed. Like he went right on the chair. He went. His life was handed back to him basically because he was looking at life in prison for racketeering conspiracy. He was looking at a minimum 15 years in prison on sex trafficking.
Did he throw up a little heart sign again?
Yeah. By the way, have you seen the courtroom sketches?
Oh, they're awesome.
He got upset. He's like, he said to the courtroom artist, he goes,
such a narcissist.
He goes, I look like a koala. I look like a koala. He didn't like the way he looked.
You know what? Our courtroom artists are quite possibly, I swear to God, they picked the worst artists in the world, but
great.
Fuck him.
Great.
Fuck.
Great.
Oh,
yeah.
I look like a koala. Get the fuck out of here. Pay attention to your trial, pal.
Yeah. But he was very involved. It was, at times it was really, really tense. It wasn't much laughter, or it was a lot of laughter, by the way, in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. There was like a lot of laughter when Johnny Depp was on the stand making jokes and stuff, but not in this case.
Remember the guy vaping in the car?
That was crazy.
While he was
that was crazy. That was crazy.
The judge is like, I've never seen that before in my life.
So it was quite the experience. I wasn't in there. I was reporting. I was hosting our coverage, but I wasn't in there. Elizabeth was, and I'm sure it was just an incredible experience. And particularly when she says how different he looks. He doesn't have hair dye. So he looks much older.
Yeah, he's got the gray, which also makes him look more you know, what's the word? Not innocent, but like it makes him look more sympathetic.
Here's the problem with that. They also saw him on videos. I don't know what these
Yeah, that
videos
doesn't
look
make him
like.
look-
I don't know what those videos look like.
Do we know who was in the videos?
Yeah, of course.
Meaning, like the jury wasn't told, "Hey, you're going to see sex videos right now," and
No. It was very clear who was on the videos.
Okay.
The videos were Cassie, they were Jane, 2 alleged victims, and different male performers and Sean Combs.
so they never saw a video of unnamed celebrity
Nope.
X. Okay.
Nope.
Right.
Nope.
So that's a huge. That goes back to your misconception that people thought was going to happen.
None of that. None of that. None of that.
Interesting. So, he, you know, when the day that the judge reprimanded him and that made the news, I was like, that's so on brand. And you're sitting here also saying he was very involved in his trial, telling his lawyers what to do as if they can't figure it the fuck out. But it's
Well, in all fairness, sometimes it's good for the defendant to be involved because he'd be like, you know, he knows these situations better than anybody else. And give him, hey, just hit him on that point or that. You know, I don't know what the conversation was.
I'm gonna guess he was over involved though, just based on who he is. I might have mentioned this last time we were on. I don't know if I did, but I want to repeat this point just because it's one of the most, like, just from a human being perspective, one of the most damning things ever. And it's not much, but there was a documentary back in 2017 called The Defiant Ones. Did you ever see this?
No, I haven't. What's it about?
For my money, it's the greatest music documentary ever made. It's 4 episodes. It was done on HBO, and it tells the story of the long-term business marriage of Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre. And it tells it through their eras, which obviously, like, they were a part of building Interscope, which was the wildest label ever built. And it's just this incredible who's who. Every person is in it. And at the beginning of the documentary, there's also something I got to tell you off camera about Diddy's involvement in this, but I can't say that one because that's in confidence. But at the beginning of this documentary, they have the B-roll of all the people who are going to be talking throughout the 4 episodes being set up and mic'd up. You know, it's all pretty normal.
That's a classic documentary move. When they step in, like,
dude, it was.
We're ready to do this? Like,
the vibe is it sets the scene so perfect. But you see like Eminem getting mic'd up. You see Snoop Dogg ripping a blunt. Go, yo, we ready home? Like, it's just like, if you're a music fan, it just gets you in the vibe. They had Tom Petty in there. Rest in peace to Tom Petty. Like, they had all these legends getting mic'd up, and then they had Diddy. And when it gets to Diddy, this is what I mean. He has no self-awareness of who he is. He's sitting there scowling like this. Hey, don't touch my hair. And you know I don't like my hair like that. And he's just like, yeah, oh yeah. Like when you watch him as a human being, just go watch the tape, people. You will be like, this guy is a fucking asshole. Like, he is someone who is all about himself. He doesn't give a shit about people. Everyone around him is just a piece of meat that he can move out of the way or tell to do his bidding. And I remember, like, long before any of this Diddy stuff was a case, I was on team Diddy fucking sucks forever. But, like, I would refer people to that scene. Just him getting mic'd up.
I gotta watch
and
it,
say, just watch that and tell me you can't tell that guy is the scum of the fucking earth. Again, though, like, him being this narcissist, megalomaniac, I don't think that's up for debate. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that's what he is. But as we said, you got to prove that he was a racketeer and did these things, and that's a separate issue.
I interviewed Charlucci, his like good friend of years, and he was there at the trial every day. And I said to him, it's like I just interviewed him. It's up on Sidebar, and I go, is he going to change? Like, if he gets released, like if he doesn't get significant prison time and he's released, like, how's his life going to be different? What's he going to do different? Like, I'm basically, is this going to humble him a little bit? It's like, we're getting him into therapy. We're getting him into therapy. He's not going to do this again. He's given up on all this. Okay. I mean, look, I will tell you, there's nothing like, he's been in jail for almost 10 months.
Yeah.
He was potentially looking at the rest of his life. And despite people saying, well, he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Each one's minimum of 10 years, 2 counts. He might get 20 years. He's not getting 20 years in prison. Not happening. I think he's probably going to get somewhere between 2 to 5 years.
And he's got time served already.
Yeah, that's what I think he's going to get. Unless something should change, there's going to be a pre-sentencing investigation and a pre-sentencing report. It's up to the judge. There's no minimum. So he could even technically say, time served, you're out. Don't think that's going to happen. Why? Because you're dealing with two victims, and also multiple instances of him committing this crime, of transporting men and the victims over state lines for the purposes of sex work. Multiple. So I think it's an aggravating factor. I think 2 to 5 years. Point is, when you're looking at the rest of your life in prison and you're going through this trial and you're hearing the testimony and you're thinking about what matters, maybe he will be a different person. I don't know. It doesn't excuse the things that he did, but you always wonder how this process could change someone.
I hope for the sake of humanity and that the people that will be unfortunately around him, whoever that may be for the rest of his life, that he does change, but he won't change. He is who he is. But, you know, you do have the subjectivity of a judge here because, as you said, there's no minimum, so he can do what he wants. Judges are human beings. They're supposed to look at everything perfectly objectively. Obviously, we know that's not possible 100% like for any human being because we're all flawed. Do you think that something that has nothing to do with the charges that he's been convicted of here, and that's something I shouldn't say has nothing to do, but one of the things he was not convicted of, for example, is that tape with Cassie. Do you think something like that plays a role in a judge who's sitting there and instead of saying 2 years says, fuck this guy, I'm giving him 4?
Yep, I do. I think the judge denied him bail again after the verdict. And the judge said one of the key factors that I'm looking at is whether or not he's a danger. And you look at all of the testimony throughout the course of this trial about his violence. In defense, you admitted he's violent. You said he engages in domestic violence. Like, you can't say he's not a danger. Now, the judge said, don't use this decision and my rationale to deny him bail as a preview of what I'm going to do at sentencing. But having said that, if you're talking about Sean Combs transporting people across state lines for the purposes of sex work, you can't necessarily separate it from all of the allegations that were levied against him about using violence and threats and coercion. Even if it wasn't sex trafficking per se, some of those characteristics or some of that evidence, I'm sure, will come into play in his decision. But I really think from a legal point of view, even if he felt that way, if he's, okay, let's say he's a judge who goes, I want to make sure that he gets time, okay? I can't justify 20 years, but what I can say from a legal point of view is 2 victims and multiple instances of him doing this. That's aggravating. What he interprets aggravating to be will be what he interprets aggravating to be. I think we were all in a state of shock when Harvey Weinstein was sentenced originally before his conviction was overturned for his first trial in New York. He was sentenced to I think it was 23 years in prison. Yeah. And it was like, whoa, that was like a shock.
A life sentence for him.
But again, I think there's a guidelines. The prosecution came forward, said this is the guidelines we're looking at before the pre-sentencing report. Again, that's when they interview Combs. They look at his they look at employment records. They interview family, friends. They speak to the victims in the case. They speak to law enforcement. They prepare a report for the judge. They were saying 4.5 to 5.5 years. The defense is saying 1.5 to 2.5 time served. So I'm thinking somewhere is where the judge might go. And obviously, if it's not a sentence that they feel is appropriate, the defense will immediately appeal and try to get the sentence reversed.
What was the estimated date of the sentencing again? You said they have to do a whole investigation.
So it was great question. It was supposed to be set for October 3rd. Then, I think it was yesterday, they're like, oh, no, we're going to push it back to September. We're going to push it to September 22nd. And the defense had requested to be expedited. They want him out of jail as soon as possible.
Right. That'll be almost a year.
Yeah, but then they apparently had a back and forth, and now they agreed to October 3rd. So October 3rd is when the sentencing is going to be.
Okay. So
he'll be in jail.
He'll be in jail
at a year.
What is it? MC?
He's right now at the MDC,
right.
But depending upon what his sentence could be, there's a chance that it'll probably be at another federal facility of some kind.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.